Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I'm excited for my conversation today with Shanna Diep. She is the CEO and founder of SLD Services. Shanna served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 21 years, both active duty and reserves, and she started her company back in 2015. SLD Services contracts tactical and medical equipment for the Department of Defense. Welcome to the show today, Shanna.
Wonderful. Thank you, Felina, for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited to share your story. I know you grew up in New York. Is that right?
That is correct. I like to call Rochester, New York, hometown for me. That's where I went to school and where my family currently is. So that is definitely home.
Awesome. That's great. Well, let's get into some of the early career choices you made, and then also obviously get into your career path. And I know you've got a lot that you have done over your career. And of course, we'll get into the launch of your business and that decision as well.
Yeah, wonderful. That sounds great.
Awesome. So where did it begin as far as you went to community college?
Yeah, so I would say, my early education, I grew up in the inner city of Rochester, New York. It's considered to call the 10th Ward. Very strong city schools, that of which my parents were, hoping to send me to the Aquinas Institute of Rochester, New York, which is a private institution. My dad was a mechanic. My mother was stay-at-home. They really couldn't afford to do it, but in order to keep me out of the city schools and kind of develop me and provide a little bit more opportunities, my dad worked overtime as a mechanic to try to afford that tuition for me. And I am definitely forever grateful to them for doing that, because that certainly set me up, I feel like, for success throughout my life. So Aquinas was my first stepping stone of, major education. And then from there, my parents had dropped the bomb on me. It's like, I had gotten into St. John Fisher College, which is a private college. But then my parents were like, we worked overtime. We paid for Aquinas. We just can't afford to send you to college. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a blow to me. So I went to Monroe Community College for a year. I was waiting tables at TGI Fridays with all my flair and my pins and the red and white.
I remember that place. That's great.
Oh, yes. And, I was complaining to a friend one day. I was like, I'm working full time. I'm paying for community college. I was just really kind of complaining and just trying to figure out how to manage it all, as, a 19, 20-year-old does. And my friend had suggested that I join the Marine Corps. So It was kind of a overnight decision. We were actually at his dad's house out riding four-wheelers in the on the farm, and we were talking about it, and I was like, that sounds like a great idea. I don't think I really knew what I was getting myself into, but that was on a Sunday. Monday, we went to the recruiter's office in Greece, New York, and I talked to my recruiter at the time, Sergeant Korn. A month later, I was at Parris Island, South Carolina, completing Marine Corps boot camp.
Wow.
Greatest overnight decision I ever made was joining the Marine Corps. I am forever grateful for the opportunities that it has set up for me and led me to my business today. But yeah, so that was how I ultimately decided to join the Marine Corps. And
Wow.
that was in 1998.
Okay. I want to ask a question here. Parents, when you came to them and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing," what was their reaction?
So I'm pretty sure if fire could come out of someone's eyeballs, I always use that analogy. My mother had fire just furious. My mother was furious that I was over 18. So at 18, you're allowed to make those decisions yourself. So you don't need a parent's signature to join the military service. I did tell her, and I didn't tell her, you know, it was such a fast overnight decision, right? So I told her about 2 weeks before I was going to boot camp, and it was really more of a, hey, mom, just so you know, I'm going to boot camp in 2 weeks. She was very mad at me. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you got yourself into. And you know, at the end of it, I wrote letters all throughout boot camp. It's a 3-month boot camp for the Marine Corps, and I did really well. I was very motivated. I was very physically fit at the time, and I was graduating and doing things. I was in the top 10% of the class. I was in the top 10% of all the exercises that you have to do. And I was, writing very positive letters home to, my parents saying, things are going well. There were no phone calls, so it was all done by, snail mail and letters. And, I thought she started to feel a little bit more comfortable with my decision to join the Marine Corps. And then it was, her telling, friends or people, colleagues, was, oh, my daughter is a Marine, but, she was a cheerleader in high school. So she was so worried that people would think, something bad about her daughter. And, now even she says today, the Marine Corps was absolutely the best decision that I ever made for my entire career path. So I do think that she's very proud of that, today.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for your service. I really, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a big decision at such a young age. And overall,
I don't think I realized that then.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes that's a benefit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So 21 years, both active duty and reserve. But you did some other things along the way as well. So talk about that and talk about too, if you can, as much as you can, some of the experience that you had, both active duty and reserves, with the Marines.
Yeah. So active duty, I spent a lot of time doing services on active duty at a lot of the reserve centers too. And those are called ADOS work or ADSW work. And, one of the things that I think was one of the most, proud moments in from my early career, I've done, a few other things in the Marine Corps. But, September 11th in 2001, obviously when the Trade Center was destroyed by the planes and our terrorist attack. So when that happened, I was actually with the 8th Tank Battalion in Rochester, New York. So it was the I&I duty there. And that day kind of became pandemonium. Like, the phones were ringing off the hook and everyone is calling and, do we need to report in? What's going to happen? Are we going to war? I mean, this is all within hours or 2 hours of this happening. So it was chaos when it really happened. And, we were at the Marine Corps unit and everyone's just trying to figure out kind of what's going on. Everyone knew pretty much immediately that, it was going to be a terrorist attack. And so people were just really wanting to know their place of duty. Were they on standby? And it was way too early in the time frame for us to kind of figure all that out. So I kind of stepped up to the plate and was just kind of managing the phone calls, which was a little bit of chaos. But, one of the things that I appreciate is I do have an award from that day that's dated September 11th, 2001, just for, just stepping up to the leadership plate of kind of managing the day a little bit. So it was an honorable moment for me, a very sad moment for me. It was a very close to home because we were in New York. And it became a big part of, my life and our military career. Obviously, it shaped the military that it is today. So that award is definitely very meaningful to me, and I do keep that one close by. But that was a great experience, not because of what happened, but just to be a part of it and to know that I kind of did my role to kind of helping give back to the Marine Corps, give back to the U.S., and give back to our community. Definitely a proud moment for that. But so I've done some really cool things like going to El Salvador. We've done medical missions. We supported building bridges and providing medical care to some of the natives out in El Salvador. Some pretty neat experiences. I myself did not go to Iraq or Afghanistan. I had my son around that same time, so I was trying to stay out of there while my husband went, because my husband's also active duty. He was actually active duty the full time for 24 years. So while he was active duty and I came off of active duty and I went back to the reserve, and stayed in the reserves the whole time, we continued to move around all the time, every 2 to 3 years, where we lived in Japan, and we lived, in Louisiana. We lived in California 3 times. We had definitely been all over the world with the Marine Corps, and I feel like I've been able to live both worlds with it, as being a spouse, an active duty spouse, a Marine Corps reservist, and so I get to play kind of Marine and spouse at the same time, which has been a great experience for my whole life.
It's fantastic. Wonderful. Well, I also want to get into a bit of your other career in pharmaceuticals as well, and obviously want to dive into your business and how you came up with the idea and talk more about that. But before we do that, how did you get into pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, so out of college, I went to college. I started taking, well, it actually took me 9 years to finish my bachelor's degree, because at the same time I was still a Marine. And I was taking a class here and a class there. I would take one class and I'd take 2 classes, and then, or we would PCS and move to, which a PCS stands for Permanent Change Station. We would move to a different location. So then I would start at a new school, and then that school would require you to take their curriculum or their credit requirements. I think when I graduated school, I think you only need 120 credits, and I think I graduated with like 160 because I had to keep taking so many different classes. But after college, we were actually stationed in New Orleans, Louisiana. And it's funny because we were there when the Hurricane Katrina hit. We had just moved there 3 months prior, and I was attending the University of New Orleans. And then Katrina hit and wiped out all of UNO. And so I ended up having to transfer schools again. And so I transferred to a school in Hammond, Louisiana, Southeastern Louisiana University, which did in return become my alma mater. I did end up graduating from there. I have a degree in communications, and my intent was always, after I graduated college, was to become a pharmaceutical sales rep. That was kind of my goal. That was, what I thought I really wanted to do. And so I kind of put all my eggs into one basket and kept, did everything it took for me to get to that position, which is funny because, when you graduate college, you just kind of start sending your resume out to everybody and anybody that will read it, and just kind of hoping and praying for a callback. And I got several interviews with Eli Lilly, GSK, and I would get, 2 or 3 interviews with them, and it would always come down to them saying, we think you would be really great at this, but we really think, we're going to go with this candidate because they have more sales experience, which was a blow to me. I was very disappointed, but I didn't give up, and I kept kind of interviewing and applying. And I got a call actually from RJ Reynolds at the time. And it's funny because they didn't even have Google. It was Yahoo. It was the search engine everybody used. And so I was Yahoo. I was like, what is RJ Reynolds? And then I was like, oh boy. So it comes up on Yahoo that it's RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company. And I am not a smoker, but if you choose to, then, that's a personal choice. And I was like, okay, well, what's my moral decision if I want to do this or not do this? And I thought to myself, well, you know what? They want me to come in for an interview. I was still young and new at the interviewing process. So I was like, I think I'm going to go and just do this for the interviewing experience. Give me a little bit more experience so I can get into pharmaceuticals. And so I went to the interview, and it went well, and they called me back, and they asked me for another interview. And then they asked me for another interview, and I kept thinking, oh boy, what am I going to do? Is this something I want to do, morally? And then, I still hadn't had any luck with the pharmaceutical company. So in my third interview, they said, well, we'd like to offer you the position. You'll have a company car, you have an incredible 401k. This is going to be your salary. And then when they said that, I was like, okay, I'll take it. So, so I took the job. It was my very first job, RJ Reynolds, which is funny because I say this today. Of all the companies I worked for, other than mine that I own now, I've never worked for another company that took better care of their employees as RJ Reynolds did. And I say that with benefits, time off, support from management, all the different things that you get from them. But so I sold contracts for them. So for large chains, I would sell in their marketing space. So I would analyze their sales data, and I would sell in the contracts for each of the large chains that are out there for how much space and marketing we would be allowed to have in the stores. So I used that as my experience, so I worked for them for about 3 years, I believe. And then it was time for me to actually my husband was going to be getting orders to California, and there was no position for me for RJ Reynolds in California. So I took that as my cue to start applying for pharmaceutical companies again. And that's when I got hired on and finally accepted a position with Novartis Pharmaceuticals. That gave me enough sales experience that they were looking for. So I was very excited to finally get into pharmaceuticals. I sold geriatrics. I sold osteoporosis, incontinence, and Alzheimer's medication.
Wow.
So I was very excited for that. You go through the schooling, you get a lot of lessons on the mechanism of actions of the drugs that I'm promoting. You work face to face with the doctors, and that's ultimately how I got into what I thought was my dream job of pharmaceutical sales.
And why was it not your dream job?
So it's funny. You always hear such great things about it. Well, the way I kind of saw it was I would spend, first of all, for me, at the time, I say this, and I don't want to say anything bad against pharmaceutical sales, but I was a glorified Starbucks delivery person. So I felt like I was delivering Starbucks like 5 times a day. I was constantly at Starbucks taking orders, and the receptionist at the doctor's office, I always said they own my life. So they would let me go back to see the doctor if I brought Starbucks. It was definitely a little bit of quid pro quo going on. And but I needed to get back to see the doctor because I needed his signature, and I needed to drop off my samples. I needed to give him what would be almost a 30-second spiel that you would get with the doctor. So I'd sit in the doctor's office as I waited about an hour. I'd get back there, talk to the doctor for 30 seconds, and drop off my samples, and I'd be out the door.
Yeah.
It just wasn't rewarding. I didn't feel like I was really making a difference. I just felt like I was a sample, definitely a Starbucks delivery barista and a sample drop off, like I didn't feel like I was doing much for the community. The Marine Corps, I've done a lot for the Marine Corps. And it just wasn't rewarding as I thought it would be, and it definitely wasn't as glamorous as I thought it would be either. But then we actually ended up getting orders with the Marine Corps. My husband got orders to Okinawa, Japan. Clearly, there was no position for me with Novartis in Okinawa. I left my job. I put in my notice before we moved overseas, and from there is actually how I got into the tactical and medical world of Department of Defense sales.
Yeah. Okay. So you stepped in as a business development manager. Talk about that role with a company called ADS. What did they do?
Yes. So ADS is actually one of the largest tactical distributors. They're out of Virginia Beach. I worked for them for almost, I think about almost 5 years. And they were out in Okinawa recruiting. And it was funny because I knew a master gunnery sergeant. Her name is Veronica Johnson, great lady. She just recently retired from the Marine Corps as well. And while she was out there, she was, thinking about early retirement and things like that. She actually interviewed for the job. I didn't know anything about it. She was interviewing for the job, and she came and got me like immediately after she interviewed. She's like, she hands me a business card. She's like, I just interviewed for this job. I'm not the right person for this position, but you are, and you need to call this individual right away. And I was kind of, blindsided by it. And I was like, okay, like I need a job. I'm in Japan. I need a job. So I called. His name was Levi Wilson. I called Levi Wilson, whom I still talk to regularly today. And, we met at a restaurant on base, and we spoke for about 2 hours, and immediately he offered me the position. I had no idea really what I was doing. And I for 2 months, I'm out in Okinawa, so I'm really by myself because they're an American-based company. Yeah. And I didn't really go to training with them until July. And I was like, what do you want me to do? It was April. I got hired actually on my birthday, April 2nd. And I was like, what do you want me to do from now until July? And he says, just go out and introduce yourself to people. Read up this on the internet and go tell them what you do. And I'm thinking to myself, I really don't know what I do. So I'm like, okay, I can go introduce myself to people. I have some business cards. I start going out there, and I laugh and cringe at the same time today, because some of the things that I was saying were 100% not true. Not possible. You couldn't do that. People would ask me questions. I'd be like, sure, you can do that. Well, then I finally got to go to what they call as a boot camp training for 3 weeks in Virginia Beach. And I came back and I learned, the whole process. I really got a better understanding of what we were actually doing. And then I started laughing at myself because of, just going out there for 2 or 3 months, really no clue what I was working on, but it worked, like no one remembers that except me. Yeah. And I laugh. I can laugh at myself today about it. And, it's a learning curve that you learn, by mistakes, and you learn by experience, and, just putting your foot out there and taking a risk. And, that's what I did. And that's how I learn the industry. So, so they support the Department of Defense. I was on the Marine Corps team, so I was selling equipment. I like to say that I was more of a contracting specialist and what we call a SME, which is subject matter expert. And I would show commands in the Marine Corps how to procure equipment that they needed. So one would think that the procurement process is pretty simplified, but it's actually convoluted for the military and the Department of Defense. There are hundreds and hundreds of vehicles that you could utilize to procure equipment. And the problem is that no one knows any of them. So, they might know how to purchase something by what we call a national stock number, or also known as an NSN number. Outside of that, the procurement process can be very challenging and convoluted. There's many, many avenues that you can utilize. So we would help educate the end users, the Department of Defense, on a streamlined contracting vehicle that was ultimately a benefit to ADS and what we call DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, and the contracts vehicles that they could procure any tactical equipment and or any medical equipment, as long as it fell within the FAR regulations. So if it's a textile, as an example, all textiles have to be considered what we call Berry compliant. That is a FAR law for DoD procurement. And what that means is that the fabrics of any fabrics that are purchased under DLA has to be 100% made in the United States, down to the thread that it's sewn with. Everything has to be made in the U.S. If it's a non-textile item, and say it is like communications equipment, maybe a headset, those have to follow regulations of being considered TAA, which is a trade agreement compliant agreement process. So that means that any trade agreement compliant countries, you're allowed to buy the equipment from there. Places like China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, North Korea are all countries that are off limits. So if any equipment is procured from any of those countries or manufactured in those countries, the DoD is not allowed to buy it. So we kind of manage right, exactly. So we manage the country of origins, is what's called, to make sure that the commands are following the guidelines set forth by the FAR regulations to ensure that they are, compliant with the procurement processes they have to follow.
Wow. I can't even imagine how complex this whole world and system is. Interesting. So obviously you worked for this company for so years, and then I'm assuming said, hey, I can do this and create my own business out of this. So
Yeah,
when
that's exactly what happened.
I see you launched in late 2015. At that point, did you come back out to the US? And is that when you decided to start your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So, so I stayed with ADS and the whole time we were out in Okinawa. And actually, then my husband, so the Marine Corps will change; they'll move you every 2 to 3 years. We were at a 3-year move time frame at that point. The U.S. moved us back to North Carolina at Camp Lejeune, and so ADS, I told ADS, hey, we're getting orders. And they actually transferred me with them. So I just moved, when we moved, and I just continued picking up where I was, and I took over the territory of Camp Lejeune. And I worked for them for a year. I had mentioned the name Levi Wilson earlier. He had been my boss the whole time. And then the company did a lateral move with him, and they actually moved him out of the management position for the Marine Corps team and moved in another individual. And that individual and I kind of butted heads a little bit. We had a different vision to what we thought was important for procurement. I'd been doing it for a while. I was constantly hitting my goals. And he was brand new to the company. And, I was starting, I guess, kind of get a little bit frustrated with my leadership. And it was just kind of a unwhelmed decision. Like, I just was like, that's it, I'm done. Like, I guess everyone just kind of hits their breaking point at one point, and that was kind of what happened. And I was like, I'm going to do this myself. Yeah. So I did do that. I walked out and was like, okay, this is going to be the end. And, we parted ways, and they went their way and I went my way, except I had a non-compete contract. So I learned my lesson very quickly on what a non-compete contract is about. Because when I went off on my own, they sued me. So non-compete contracts are quite interesting. Really, when you're they are a very large multi-billion-dollar company, and here I am, me. Yeah. And so it was just me. And, their intent really is to cause financial harm, right? Yeah. So and that's really, at the end of the day, what kind of happens with these lawsuits. They, put forth the defense. I had to go and, retain an attorney, all those different things. And then from there, the day, it's funny because we fought. The day we were supposed to go to trial, on Monday, and then Friday at 8 p.m. they called and just called it off. So they never had intent to actually go to trial. Here I am.
You just wanted to make your life miserable.
Yes, so, and then really at the end of the day, if you look in, the history of lawsuits through non-compete, that's really the way it works. So that hardly ever do they go to trial. I was definitely younger and naive and didn't understand it and terrified, really. But, that's part of life. And now I look back and I kind of laugh about it. So what happened? It was over. So that day it was like, okay, that's the end of it. And I kind of went on about my business, and they went on about their business. And truth be told, we don't do a lot of business together now, but we do some business together. So, it's just in this industry that is very prevalent and a part of the game. And, my thought process is bygones are bygones. And, we are here to support and take care of our United States military, the Department of Defense. And if, that I didn't take it personally. It's just business. And I tell that to people all the time. This isn't a personal decision. It's just a business decision. And, we have to, do what's right for the customer. And as long as we're all doing that and we're doing that ethically, then at that point, I feel like I'm doing the right thing and I'm doing a good job. And that's what's important to me. So if, I have to go to ADS to purchase something because it's cheaper, well, then that's what I'll do, because that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Oh, that is rough. And it's so interesting because in certain states, non-compete agreements don't hold up in court. Like in California, you can't.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So now I'm in California and it doesn't mean anything.
Oh my goodness. I know
But
there's
I do make sure my employees now, I don't make any of my employees now sign a
yeah.
non-compete because, in California, they don't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, let's get into your business, strategic
Yeah.
logistics and defense services. So
hmm
for folks that are not familiar with the DoD and how all of this works, you gave us a really good simplified example when you talked about your work at ADS. Can you do the same as you talk about your work for your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So, SLD services, Strategic Logistic Defense Services, which are my initials for Shanna Diep. One day I was like, what am I going to call this business? When I left ADS, I was like, okay, I'm creating a business. So what should I call it? So, and in the industry, there's so many companies with 3-letter acronyms. I'm like, well, I need a 3-letter acronym too. What should I use? So that's kind of how my name came about. My husband and I were sitting in the living room one day, and that's kind of like what we came up about with was SLD services for strategic logistics and defense services. So, we only do Department of Defense sales. So we don't do any commercial sales. We don't do any individual personnel sales. We only do government contracts. So the military, and having been in the industry for so long, even including, all of my time that I spent at ADS, and I am forever grateful because I am where I am today from my experience at ADS. They do a great job teaching their, employees the process and the regulations of Department of Defense, regulations for procurement. And truly, that's where I learned a lot of this information. So when I went off on my own, I also brought a lot of my customers with me. One thing I've learned over the years is that customers are really kind of loyal to their rep. They're not necessarily loyal to their company. So it's very important that when you're the company and you have employees, that your employees are loyal to you as the company. And the way that they're loyal to you is that you treat them right. You take care of them. You pay them the right amount of money. You are respectful of their time. And if your employees are loyal to you and the customers are loyal to the employees, that's how you create a strong business. And I'm not naive enough not to understand that. I've been there. I've taken, the customers that came with me because they were like, Shanna, I don't care what company name it's under. We just want to work with you because you're customer service. You answer our questions. You're always there when we need you to be, and you're responsive. So those are the things that they kind of count on and depend on. And, their ethics are always there. So they know that they're going to be doing the right thing. They know that I'm going to look out for them. So I have a very strong, long, loyal customer base. Some that I started off with brand new Marines that were lieutenants, and now some of those lieutenants are now getting promoted to lieutenant colonel. And I still work with them today. So, it's been, 13 years or so that I've had some of the same customers that are still in the Marine Corps. But, we are SLD services is what we consider under the DLA prime contracts as a kitting company. So customers will come to myself, our employees, and say, hey, Shanna, we need to purchase, or we would like to purchase X, Y, and Z. So we want this medical bag, we want this ladder, we want this holster, and I'm just giving some examples of some
that's
things
helpful.
that they might purchase.
Yeah.
So
So almost anything,
we'll
right? Like from
really,
office supplies to do you
so we
get
don't do
into?
office supplies.
Okay.
So there is a contracting vehicle through DLA that has a scope. And the scope of the contract through Special Operations Equipment Contract and or the FES, which stands for Fire and Emergency Services Contract, do have a scope. So DLA only allows certain items to go through that contracting vehicle. When they send me a list, oftentimes the customer will send me, a list of 40 items, and I'll say, you can buy this and you can't buy this, and you can't buy this, or you can buy this. You can't buy this exact one, but you can buy this. So we're scrubbing those lists for them to make sure that they're falling within the scope of the contract, number one. And number two, that the items that they're buying fall within the FAR regulations or DLA requirement of it being Berry compliant and or TAA compliant. So we are making sure that the customer stays clean and compliant through the requirements that they have to follow. Sometimes they don't even know what those requirements are. And we work as that liaison and a value added resource for them to scrub those lists for us. So that's another reason why we gain so many customers, because we're doing that legwork for them where they're busy doing, 100 other different tasks. So we become, I always, joke with it and say the easy staples button. We're the easy button. They contact us and say, Shanna, we need this and this. We make sure that happens. So, we kind of put it together when the customer comes to me and says, hey, we want to buy all these things. We then create their list and we put it together as a kit for them. And we then contract that kit part number. So that kit part number will include all the items. So that, so that's the number that goes out to contracting. And that's how we win our bids, because it's our part number.
Got it. Fascinating. And sounds very complex. and I'm sure
I feel like it's easier. It sounds a little difficult. It's easier, but then people are like, no, Shanna, it's really not.
No,
That's
definitely.
because I've been doing it for so long.
Well, and super high barrier to entry, right? Which is good, for a company in that space, because not anybody can just wander in and, try to sell folks items, right? I mean,
right.
these
Exactly.
very relationship driven and a lot of gatekeepers, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Many gatekeepers. We have many competitors out in the marketplace. We're certainly a small company, but I definitely would say that we're a player in the game. We've done very, very well over the years, and we continue to grow at a very expeditious rate. I mean, it has been a wild ride, and I'm forever grateful, for the mentors that I've had, even Levi Wilson, who was my old boss at ADS, who, really mentored me and got me to where I am, and led me down the right path for ADS. I did very well. I learned the processes, and he even supported me when I went out to become SLD services, and he still supports me today. So, it's about having the right mentors. It's about having the right guidance and asking those questions and being hungry to figure it out. And, I definitely think it's about putting yourself around the right people and having the courage to actually just kind of step outside of your comfort zone and, just taking a chance. It's about taking a chance. And I'm very grateful that, that I did that and that I had the support of my husband to do that, right? Sometimes it's hard to just start a business and, take that risk. And, it is definitely 100% comes down to having that support behind you.
Yeah, great advice. Absolutely. Well, what's on the horizon for the business, Shanna? You talked a bit about growth. Are there any areas you're looking to grow in? Any new services
Yeah.
you're looking to offer?
Yes, definitely. So I feel like I am constantly scouring the marketplace for new business development managers. We're trying to find, people that can help us grow the business. We actually have been talking to a few people about hiring actually a little bit more of a manager role because, currently right now while I'm the CEO of the company, I'm still kind of working as a little bit of the sales rep too, and more a lot of the business development side because we keep growing and we've become, the contracts, we're doing about 50 contracts each month. And, we're at about a $90 million just in 2022 of contracts. It's a lot to manage, even the backside of it where you're doing the contract in the beginning, but then after you get the contract, then you need to make sure the deliveries are happening. What if it's a partial shipment? So now you're following up on all the vendors. So with 50 contracts going on at any given time, there's a lot of emails, there's a lot of phone calls, there's a lot of follow-up. And I need to really focus on being that CEO and really managing the business portion and the growth side of SLD while I have a lot of other, employees and that can kind of manage the business development side of it so that we can continue to grow. So we are looking at possibly bringing on, and me being the president of the company, possibly bringing on someone that can bring a little bit more of the CEO side of it for strategic development. Where do we need to go next? Should we be focusing on other contracts other than DLA? I am a woman-owned, veteran-owned small business. So there's a lot of other opportunities that we're not tapping into that I know that we can. We just haven't because we haven't had the bandwidth to do it. So we are going to be hiring people. Obviously we'd like to hire people from the military. We always say, I feel like it's a credibility thing, walk the walk, talk the talk kind of thing. So we are excited to be expanding and, really tapping into a higher contracting level that we're not currently in, mainly because of the bandwidth. We have the capability, we have the know-how on how to do that. However, we need the personnel to kind of get us there. So we're continuing to grow, and we're going to continue to look at other contracting vehicles that are going to be available to us. And, hopefully, we'll be the next ADS one day.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Shanna, if our listeners want to follow you or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, we would love to hear from any of you. If you have any questions about what we do, or if you, just want to know a little bit more, we're happy to answer any questions. But you can contact me probably the best way through our website. It's www.sldservicesllc.com. My contact information is on there. I think Lorraine, Yvonne's. I think it will lead you to contact us now, which will go to our sales email address. And that's sales@sldservicesllc.com. And, we'll be able to get back to you that way is probably the best way to reach us currently.
Wonderful. Well, Shanna, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed getting to know you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been such an honor, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.